Welcome back, everyone, for this second press conference for Alexander Payne's The Holdovers. My name is Joe Utiki. I'm the executive awards editor at Deadline, and I'm excited to be joined now by Da'Vine Joy Randolph, who plays Mary Lamb in the movie. Welcome, Da'Vine.
Hi, thank you.
Now, as we did with Paul, we'll talk to Da'Vine about this exceptional film for the next half an hour or so, and I'll put as many of your questions to her as I possibly can in the time we have allotted. And I've got the questions that you've pre-submitted to hand, but I would encourage you to use the Q&A function in the chat at any time during the press conference to submit new questions. So if you're inspired by the conversation to jump in, please do so. Just be sure to include your name and country so I can identify you. Now, Da'Vine, I wonder if I can maybe start by asking you to tell us a little bit about how this wonderful role, this great script, came into your life.
I was very fortunate. I got a call from my team. It's told me that there was this new project that this director would like to reach out to me about. And I was currently filming something in Atlanta, and I had like quickly flown in to LA to come back home. And it was really rushed and quick, but I was like, sure, no problem, let's make it happen. And I get on this Zoom with this man, and I'm speaking to this man named Alexander Payne, and I'm quite immediately impressed by his depth of understanding of the human condition and human empathy. And I could tell quite immediately that he was uh, oh, sorry. I have a delivery coming. So that's my dog barking. Apologies. You could tell that. One second, sorry. Do you mind grabbing the door? There's someone at the door. Sorry, my apologies. He's a
No
very
worries. I have a little dog upstairs as well, liable to bark any minute.
bulldog. Is a very good guard dog. Okay, sorry. So we chatted and we talked, and I was really impressed by his empathy and his ability to, speak from a place of honesty and earnest um, introspect. And that's something that as an actor, I love to do. So I was really wowed that that was something that he could do. So we talked about the character and we talked about the world of the play. He then gave me the script. And then after that, around Thanksgiving, we then circled back and he offered me the part. So I didn't have an elaborate process. I was invited on a little bit. I think I was the last person to be invited on.
Mhm.
And I remember him saying to me that he was like, there's two actors for the role of Angus, and one in particular has never done this before, but there's something special about him. And I remember saying to him, I was like, well, I think you should follow your gut. If if that's where you're seeing things align, follow your gut. And my goodness, I'm so glad he did with Dominic for the role of Angus. So yeah, I don't have like a big crazy story, but I'm so grateful that he thought of me, and he had mentioned that him seeing my role in Dolomite was with Eddie Murphy. Dolomite is my name was something that I think kind of grabbed his attention. So yeah.
Well, we'll come on to Dominic Sessa, absolutely extraordinary performance in this film. But Dana Abercrombie from the AAFCA has a question about Mary, and she asks, "Can you talk about the complexities of a woman grieving over the loss of her son while deciding to care for these students?"
Sure. So the care for the students is her job. However, I find that what is so beautiful about it is that it is a great distraction. It opens her heart up from not being so hardened. It allows her to um, go through this process of grieving. In a way, I think it saves her that she has work to do in the midst of all of this. Angus, without a word being said, ends up healing and filling this gap within her as she is suffering the loss of her child in a really beautiful way. In regards to the grief, I So I when I was in graduate school, I unfortunately in that 3 year span suffered a lot of loss. But due to me going to uh, school, I was at Yale School of Drama. Due to me going there, my parents didn't want me to become distracted. And so they told me to stay at school, to not come, don't worry about the funeral. The family understands and supports what you're doing. And so I didn't go. And I didn't know that I thought I had grieved them. And I
Mm.
didn't know that I didn't fully. And when we started doing this show, some of those things started to come up for me. And what I understood that was really interesting was that grief, though there is that convenient chart of like the stages of grief, it's so much more complex than that. However, I use that as a template, if you will, to kind of chart where she was at, scene to scene, moment to moment. And what I found that's interesting is that with grief, you can go through they can come in any array of arrangements. You could go through denial and depression at the same time. You can go through acceptance and anger at the same time. It's not so cookie cutter convenient. It really can happen a lot of different ways and out of order. And so I just allowed myself to go on this like emotional roller coaster of feeling and I did that because I wanted, when I realized that this movie was potentially going to be a movie for people who aren't necessarily feeling in the holiday spirit that so many of a dramatic amount of movies are about, right? This one is unique in that it shows this other view, which is also a very real view. And so I quickly wanted to have something in this character of Mary, not only being this strong feminine presence and one of the few female presence, I wanted it to be something that people could really attach to and relate to. And so I wanted to show as many, if not all, of the stages of grief so that whoever was watching it and whatever they were going through in that time, they could relate to it, right? So if someone is in their current stage of denial, great, we got you covered. Because it was important to me that if I was going to do this, I understood quickly that this role was about um, me as the actor having the courage to share my heart with the audience and to use myself basically as a vessel and have the courage to just to be willing to go there and show those different sides. It wasn't easy, but I definitely can say it was worth it in regards to how, and it's beyond someone saying you did a great job of the movie. It means more to me when people are connecting on a deep level, or it's somehow bringing a family or, people together or allowing people to go through. It can have, people have said to me too, of like, oh, I realized I didn't process, my own loss in X, Y, and Z, and I know what that's like now. So,
Mm.
yeah, that was kind of how I went about it, and two of like, right, you got to find that right tone because it can't be. If I would have laid into it heavy, I think you guys would have, as the viewer, would have disassociated or like too much. And I think if I wouldn't have done it enough, you would have been like, does she really care? Does it really matter? You know what I mean? And so there's kind of this, I was constantly with Alexander's help having to like tune and turn the dial to find the right sweet spot, scene to scene, moment by moment of, what is appropriate in this moment and finding the right point where you as a viewer could engage
Mm.
and respond and connect to.
Well, I suppose the word is empathy, really. I mean, there's this incredible well of empathy
Yeah.
in Mary and in your performance here. Sarah K. Adamson from the CCA asks about that, and wonders why you think it's so important in film. I'm also curious, How did that manifest, that turning of the dial that you described?
It's just
Instinctual, maybe?
instinctual slash a lot of practice. It's hard because see, I started with theater. So the beautiful thing about theater is we could just listen to the audience and they'll let us know. You know what I mean? Um, so it took a lot of trial and error. And then sometimes, to be honest, the crew, the people on set, you know what I mean? Sometimes they would come up to me like, "Oh, you really gutted me." I'd be like, "Oh, okay, that might be too much." You know what I mean? Or feedback from them. Alexander, there was no video village or monitors, so in many senses, he quite literally was my eyes. And so I think it's like, not to be corny, but I think you got to do some work on yourself. You know what I mean? Like I said, back to that courage, you have to be in a place within your spirit where you can be open and willing to surrender to that character. You kind of gotta emotionally palate cleanse yourself, if that makes sense, in order to be open to that. So
Mhm.
ways in which I did that was I didn't mope around and be sad and all those things. I did the opposite. I was very cheery and jokey and jovial, um, up until I had to do what I had to do. Because if I would have been, stuck in a rut, I would either be giving bits of my performance away throughout the day, or I would be locked and I couldn't go there, or it would probably be too much. So I
Mhm.
think, listen, I think in many senses, we all, whether you're doing a role about grief or not, I think actors and creatives, when doing art, I think empathy is a huge component, whether you're a visual artist or a musician. I think that's the whole point, even if you're doing comedy. But being able to, my job is to be able to tell and retell and show the human condition. And empathy has to be present. That's why, even if you're playing a villain, you still have to be empathetic because that person is going through something that's making their story be told in this way. So I think it really requires you to do a bit of work on yourself as well in order to give unto the character.
100%, 100%. Patrick Heidman has a very interesting question, which is that you've spoken about the art of listening as
Yeah.
something you really had to get into in order to play Mary. And he asks, is listening one of the harder things when it comes to acting and
Yes.
maybe even in real life?
Yes, yes. I'm not as good of a listener in real life. I'm gonna tell you now. I get excited, especially with my friends. I'll get excited, and if I feel like we're on the same page, I'm like, yes, because. And I sometimes have the bad habit of cutting people off. So number one, that's not my natural, you know. And then on top of that, yes, you do because you're listening more. I think I can almost bet most actors, when in a scene, are more tentatively listening than they ever naturally have in real life, right? Which is a good practice. It's a really good practice to have and to adopt because you receive so much more. You then see all these nuances. You can receive people in a new and interesting and more detailed way. So yes, that is wonderful, but it's hard. It's very hard to do. It's kind of that thing of like, don't think about an elephant, and now you're just thinking about an elephant. It's easy to say, listen, but then people can have this face where they're just like, and it's
Right.
like an act. You know what I mean? It's a bit of this thing going on, but yeah, it takes you you have to slow down to be good. I mean, and she has a much slower rhythm cadence than I do in general. But across the board, when acting, it requires you to smell the roses, if you will. Take that
Hmm.
in like a drink of water. In school, they used to say it's like playing tennis. You serve it, but you got to let it get to them for them to then receive it make the choice as to whether or how they're going to serve it back to you. And then, you know what I mean? Like, you got to wait for the serve. You can't serve it and then be like, ah. No, they have to let them get the ball and then throw the ball back.
Mhm.
So in that space of serving it, releasing it, offering it, and then seeing how they accept it, and then what they will offer back, that's a sweet spot. That's when you guys are then watching things and where you're connecting with. A lot of times it's in the nonverbal that you're
Absolutely.
how we're receiving this information and how the other actor then is going to throw it back. That's the sweet spot. That's why listening is so important. It's almost less important the words they're saying, but how they're saying it and how what is being said to them makes them feel. Mm-hmm.
You talked about there that the cadence that you found in playing Mary as well. And we have a question from Dwayne Hamby about your accent. He says that your accent's part of the charm of the character. And can you describe the process of developing it and keeping it consistent throughout the film? I would even extend that and say, I'm curious to know, how much work you put into the way that Mary holds herself, the way that she holds a cigarette, the way that she kind of exists in a scene, the clothes that she wears. All of that seems incredibly deeply thought.
Yes, yes. That's usually how, like, even if those things weren't, even if she didn't have these unique characteristics that I'll say are so different from me, that's how I approach all my roles. It's just I think by it being encased in a period piece, those things are more transparent, you know what I mean? Slash, it's a quiet film, so you can kind of observe those details a little bit more. But I always do those things, and also the set of dialect. So in regards to the dialect, at first the creative team was kind of indifferent about the dialect, and they were like, well, because I'm from Philadelphia and I've lived for many years in New York, so I think they were kind of, content with the idea of like Northeast, and I was like, oh, no, 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 it's Boston, like that's so specific. And I knew, and I thought of, well, if I was from Boston, I I would want it to sound as such. Because those are things that me as a viewer bother me, or that I'm like, why didn't they? What is the generic? So that's kind of like my personal taste. That I'm just that kind of person that enjoys that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and I love dialects. And so I had the great privilege to work with a dialect coach named Tom Jones. And I mean, I think he's probably most known for working with Nicole Kidman on almost all of her stuff, because, a lot of times she's not speaking in her actual tongue. We worked on it, but what was so cool is we got so specific with it that we were able to nail down a late 60s, early 70s Black dialect for Boston. And how we did it is that we pulled YouTube University. I always say YouTube University. So we pulled lots of interviews, like when local news was interviewing people or people giving speeches. And my personal favorite was Donna Summer. So Donna Summer's from Boston, also during that time period. So if you notice with Mary, there's a little bit more nasality that she has, and that's a huge Donna thing. So that's also like my love of Donna, just showing her some love. But she's a little more nasal, but I just love that characteristic. I thought that was so cute and charming and endearing. And yeah, so that was our way in. Then you have this thing when working with dialects where you have like key phrases. And so they're usually like 5 to 6 phrases that words, or it could be riddles or something like that, or like a little nursery rhyme thing that each one contains the sound or really the vowel of that dialect. So with dialects, the biggest um, notes of differentiation is vowels. Vowels are what really dictate a dialect. It's like lilt of like how musical and they are with the phrasing, or speed. and rhythm, but really the vowels are the thing. That's the heart, vowels are the emotion. So that's the big thing. So I had these key phrases that I would, because you asked about how did I keep it consistent. So if ever I felt like I lost it, I would go to these key phrases. Before we did a take, I would always say a little phrase. I'd be like, Mr. Hanum, you're so funny. Or, but that would help me like, I'm ready, I'm locked in. It also helped that we did live in Boston, although it made it almost trickier for me because they're speaking in modern day Boston, and they were like little things that were different that sometimes would throw me. But what I did do is we were there for 3 months. I stayed in a Boston dialect the entire time. I would order groceries. I would, whatever I could do. I stayed in that dialect. I talked to her like that the whole time. And it just helped me stay in the general area of it. So that was that in regards to dialect. And then like the clothes, I knew the posture had to be different because she's older than me. Also, grief kind of riddles your body in a different way. It kind of ages you in a little bit, or it kind of feels like it almost feels like a really good workout that kind of makes you kind of sore and achy a little, like you're kind of stiff. Um, and also time period wise, I just knew she carried herself in a certain way, like very just there was something very cute and like graceful about her, like no sharp or quick gestures, and like very kind of contained. Um, I don't know. And so for me, I kind of focused on that. The cigarettes. I had cigarettes mailed to me 2 days after getting it. The job, Alexander mailed me cigarettes, and I was practicing because I don't smoke. I watched movies. Betty Davis was a huge influence. I also would go in Boston. I would people watch a lot on my days off. I would like go to the park and bring a little pack of cigarettes with me and sit on a bench and just kind of observe people. If I could see other smokers, I would watch what they were doing and, see if I wanted to add on a characteristic or not of how they smoked. But then overall, what I do with all my characters, the wardrobe, hair, makeup, I really love fashion. I love details. So even if I'm on a red carpet, I'll create a mood board of like hair ideas and makeup, and it's kind of like this vision board of how I envision the piece. So I just do that naturally I do it for fun. It helps me. I'm very visual. And so I did the same thing for all my characters. So similarly with her, and I had the amazing Wendy Chuck, who everything was vintage that I wore, even if it wasn't vintage sourced. They sourced vintage fabric and would custom make, which is quite a feat. I mean, if people know about vintage anything, if you can just imagine vintage fabric, especially stuff during that time period, ironically, was either very thin and sheer or very heavy, like a corduroy. So for like that pink blouse that I wear when I'm going to the dinner, or the blue dress that's at the party, is very fine and delicate. And so I had to be very careful in putting everything on. I didn't rip anything, or they had to constantly bring it. And they had this tailor that was specifically for vintage things to like know how to carefully take care of them and patch them up and sew them. So it was a whole thing. It was really quite special. And then for hair, I pulled references from real people. Wheezy from the first season of The Jeffersons. She had a similar look for the work look, where it's like up in a bun. For the award, the Christmas party. That look is something that Phyllis Hyman wore on a cover of her album. So I just try to input, because it also helps me, right? Of this idea of, especially that it was period, bringing people who I admire, icons, Donna Summers, the Phyllis Hymans, You know what I mean? The character of Wheezy, bringing all this kind of iconography, that's other things that helps me stay in the world. Or I listen to certain music that I felt like Mary would listen to and keep that kind of around me to create this world. But also, we weren't working in a warehouse to, like, you know what I mean, where they had this set. There was no built sets. We were in real spaces. So that helped a lot too. And we lived in the neighborhood where we were filming. So it was all around us. So that was really helpful.
Time is flying, and I honestly feel like we could carry on this conversation all night. There's so much to discuss here. I have to ask about working with Paul and Dominic,
Yeah.
and the bond that forms between these three characters. It feels like a bond that formed between those three actors as well. Tell me about that experience.
They're truly wonderful men, first and foremost. They're excellent at their craft, so talented. But and I say this because I've worked with many people who are really talented, but it makes a difference when they're a good person. They have a really good heart.
Mm.
So yes, the we genuinely liked and like each other. Even now of doing press, it's so enjoyable and so wonderful to be back with everyone. It's really quite special. Dominic is a natural. To me, he's an old soul. He had such a willingness and an appetite to learn, and was a very quick learner, very quick, and could take direction very well. So it wasn't like we felt like we were with a child actor. Do you know what I mean? Where it was like, okay, well, let's wait until they, you know. No, he kept right in step with us, 100%. And Paul is a gem. He's a treasure. Immensely talented, but one of the most kindest, egoless people I've ever met. And he, as well as Alexander just said, such a great template for us as the leaders, you know, guiding our ship. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's a no-brainer to say that Paul is talented, but the thing I love to make note of is the beautiful human being that Paul is. And I think because of that is why he's able to create these nuanced, complex, and beautifully complicated characters throughout his entire career because of the man of who he is. And similarly, extremely empathetic, very emotionally mature, and have a, you know what I mean, a high aptitude of emotional intelligence. Uh, I, I really can't say enough. He's a really, really special human being.
He speaks just as highly as you of you as you know. Listen, we've only got time for one more question, and it's going to come from TJ Callahan from the CCA. You are, of course, from Broadway. You're a Tony winner, and TJ asks if the movie making process is that much different from theatre. What you like, I suppose, about each of the art forms, each of the mediums.
Um, is it different? Yes and no. I mean, the biggest difference I can think of is one is in front of a live audience. So you're constantly getting that call and response kind of relationship with the audience and you and your performance. The other is that you're telling the same story many times. So in an interesting way, it's imagine having, if you're lucky, 100 takes of the same story. So with that being said, hopefully as it goes on, you're continuing to deepen and fine tune this moment in this character's life, where TV kind, I mean, well, TV, yeah, but film in particular kind of has that start, middle, and end. And so, but that's similar to a play. It's a full, complete story. Um, but you're then solely relying on the director and the cast in the telling of the story in regards of the checks and balances of tone. Um, yeah, I would say that's the first immediate thing. I do love both of them. I think one sharpens the other, and vice versa. Very much so. I think, in my humble opinion, if an actor would be open to it, I think every actor, every so couple of years, it wouldn't be the worst thing if they were to do a play. I think it would actually be a great way to sharpen your tools, because I think it can get very, I call it 9 to 5 ish, especially with TV. And I just think this is too special of an art form for anything to ever become 9 to 5 ish. So I am constantly looking for, if it's not literally theater, something where we might consider it, I don't know, like an independent or art house film like this one, in my humble opinion, where you kind of get back to the basics. But more so than I think I ever have in a film, this truly felt like not only theater, but like I was back in school. Like there wasn't this pressure of perfection. It just was a sense of, it really felt like a creative lab. Like, let's just create some things. And it didn't feel goal oriented or like an end result, like boom, and then it's done. It would felt like, and I kind of love how the movie trails off at the end as well. And I think that kind of mimics it, of like, this is our offering of this version of it, and you can go do another version of it. Or there isn't this finite thing of, they say it, some of the characters do, but who knows what they're going to go off and do. Where some movies are like, and that's that, boom, and you know what I mean. And I kind of really enjoy, I know for me it took off a lot of the pressure, and that I was much more open to be inquisitive and curious and create within this world and within the character of Mary. But yeah, I would say those are probably the biggest differences. And I think film allows you to slow down, and film allows you to see the details. Where sometimes I think, at least for me at that time, also was the beginning of my career, I was much more broad strokes. Like I would look at the piece as like in chunks. That kind of like, not necessarily like act one, act two, act three, but kind of like, I have this chunk, then I have this chunk. Oh, and then that moment happens, and then there's this chunk. Where here I'm like moment to moment with film. And that could be also my process and my craft deepening and sharpening. But at least now I'd be curious, if I were to do a theater piece now, if I would be more in that detailed, slowing down, listening. Because, too, you got to think about it. There's so much space in between. Who's going to know if you're really listening? Where the camera in your face, it tells on you if you're really listening or not, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you should, but I think that's also why people can sometimes think in chunks, a theater of like, okay, these are the moments that I have to hit in this piece. Where, I mean, unless you're doing like a Pinter piece or something like that, or a Chekhov, where it really kind of slows down and settles. But I hope that if I and when I do theater, that I'll be able to apply those techniques from theater, from film into theater. I think it might give it a more fuller performance.
Well, Da'Vine, I cannot wait to see you on stage next. And I just love listening to you talk about your process. I'm sure our audience at home does as well. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a happy holiday.
Happy holidays, everyone. Bye.
Bye.